me introduce myself. I'm Mary Thomas Spears. It's Thomas Spears hyphenated. It's Thomas, my maiden name. Though I am divorced, but the Spears kind of hung on to for legal reasons. AKA Reverend Mary. You know me as Reverend Mary. That is a title, the Reverend title is a title I've denounced along with the world churches, but I am still a minister, so a lot of people still call me Reverend Mary or still refer to me as Reverend Mary out of respect, and so I appreciate that. I am the founder and owner of Diverse Sanctuary Community Network online, or Diverse Sanctuary Community Network Ministries offline. And I am a board member and one of the founding board members of Americans for Cannabis. And treasurer of Americans for Cannabis, and also the head chairperson of Kentucky for Cannabis. And I have worked for many organizations and worked with many groups and founded other groups like Stop the Ignorance and the Web of Life group, which were extensions of Diverse Sanctuary. I also am the author of Designing Your World, which is a website, designingworld.com, and the website constitutionalcannabis.com, and hopefully the magazine designingworld.com one of these days, if I can ever get that done. There has been some funding issues and some technical difficulties with that, but I'm still working on it. And excuse me if I keep saying but I'm doing this by myself, and I got the camera sitting up here in the window so the light, so you can see me, and that means I see the window and I can see what's happening back there. It's just kind of distracting. Trying to stay focused here. Focus. And usually I'm pretty good at staying focused, and in fact, it usually pisses people off how focused I am. Especially because I've been focused on Repeal for the last 10 years. And when I say focused on Repeal, what does that mean? Well, for those of y'all that don't know what I'm talking about the repeal of Prohibition of cannabis, sativa L, or marijuana, hemp. To me, they're all the same plant, even though there are those who would like you to believe that they are different plants. Keep in mind, when you're telling your story about how they are different plants, that I remember when we sat down and as a group, 20 years ago, and decided that we could end Prohibition by convincing you that it was two different plants, and that we could attack the government by two different angles, and if we divide, we could somehow conquer. So just keep that in mind while you're trying to convince me that we're talking about two different plants, because we're not. Cannabis sativa L is the same plant. It is a hemp plant, depending on how you want to define the word hemp. But we're talking about how they legally define words, and that's what I want to talk to you about, is how they legally define words when we're talking about repeal. And And so there was a time when I was trying to legalize marijuana, and that time has came and went, and everything has its time, and legalization's had its time, but its time is over, in my opinion. And I hope that if you watch this video and you hear what I have to say, maybe you'll understand why. When I was fighting in the courts for my life and for the lives of others and the rights of others, as a minister who had provided cannabis to a undercover agent who claimed to be a cancer patient who came into my ministry, I was hit with 6 felonies, and I was looking at 45 years to life here in Kentucky at that time, because at that time in Kentucky, it didn't matter if it was a seed, a joint, a roach, or 20,000 pounds. It was the same felony. So, I was hit with 6 felonies, 3 felonies for trafficking, and 3 felonies for trafficking within 1,000 yards of the school. Now, let's talk about that for a minute, and I don't want to go into too much detail about it, because that's not what this video is about. But, first of all, I was charged with possession of a controlled substance. Possession of a controlled substance, not an illegal substance. Keep that in mind, the wording. Possession of a controlled substance, not an illegal substance. Cannabis is not illegal because it's already been taxed by the Marijuana Tax Act, which recognizes it as legal through taxation. It was then prohibited through DEA and the Controlled Substance Act. So you were never given a chance to actually pay your taxes on it. And then the Controlled Substance Act said, well, it had no medicinal value. Now, I don't want to go into explain to you the whole how cannabis was prohibited, but I want you to understand that it was the words they used to define cannabis, and the words they used in the courts to allow this prohibition to go down. It was all based on words, and a lot of it was based on no research or no scientific evidence at all, and in fact was based on a hoax. And if you visit one of my websites, you can find that information, and it's online. I'm not going to take credit for it. The information's out there. There's hundreds of websites, if not thousands, on cannabis and marijuana and legalization. There's not many of them on Repeal, and so that sets my website slightly apart from the others, in that my websites are about repeal of prohibition. What am I saying when I talk about legalization and repeal? And a lot of people have heard me say this, and I said this several years ago, and it's actually other people say it now. But as far as I know, I was the first one to say it, and that is that legalize means legalize. And really that's what it is, because if you look at the definition of the word itself, legalize, and you look at the legal definition of the word, it explains to you that through legalization, you are sanctioning and you're sanctioning, you're validating, which is the same as mandating. You're validating and sanctioning, which is the same as mandating. You're validating and sanctioning the act. Validating and sanctioning the act. The act of what? Well, if you legalize prohibition, you're validating and sanctioning the act of prohibition. Which means you're not freeing the weed, you're only giving them permission to prohibit it and regulate it even more. Um, the proof of this is, and this is just information I learned while I was in court when I was being represented by my attorney, friend, and mentor, Gatewood Galbraith. But Gatewood said to me at one point, he said, "Look at alcohol. Alcohol is legal. It's prohibited in 77 counties here in Kentucky currently." And he's right. You can legalize a substance, but that only leads to further prohibition. Because you're handing them, you're validating their right, you're mandating their right to prohibit in the first place. So, are you doing yourselves a favor by legalizing marijuana? Well, a lot of states think they are. I mean, all these people that think they're free to some extent. But how many of them's already been pulled over, or gotten a ticket for DUI, or already facing federal charges because the feds hit them? And, well, yes, the feds want to legalize it at this point, or at least 13 governors do at this point. But what does that mean? And why now? Well, let me tell you why now. Why now is because for the last 10, 15 years, there have been a group of activists like me who's been trying to get to you the information on genetically modified hemp. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is 20 years ago when we sat down, we decided that we were going to divide our forces, and we were going to put half of our activists on this side to work on the hemp issue, and half of our activists on this side to work on the marijuana issue. And if we could convince the government that at least that they should legalize hemp because of its industrial properties, that once we got that broken through, they would understand that this is really just a plant, and it's good medicine too. And so eventually and that was our line of thinking. And what we forgot to think about was legal definitions of the words that we were using. In a way, we were thinking about legal definitions. That's why we were dividing our forces. But we didn't think it all the way through. And we sure didn't think about farming and agriculture and where that was standing at the time, or the fact that, and we kept thinking, our line of thinking is the reason they won't legalize cannabis is because they can't patent a plant. But see, they learned how to do that 20 years ago with genetic mutations or GMOs. And so it wasn't that they couldn't patent cannabis, it was that they hadn't quite figured out how to yet, and that they were working on it, and that they were working on patenting cannabis, but they wanted to make sure they got all the patents they could get before they released it to you, because they wanted to make sure that they had a monopoly on it so that they can control the market. And that's what this is really about, people. This is really about controlling the marketplace, and that's why we need prohibition, because prohibition makes sure that we have a black market, and a black market creates two marketplaces, and if we can control both of them, we can make double the profit. And this is about maximizing profits, and that's why we want to replace everything natural and everything God-given with an industrialized, synthetic, man-made copy, so that we can employ the world while we pick and choose who we employ, and while we pick and choose who lives and dies, and while we pick and choose who gets their medicine or who doesn't get their medicine. Because we are not only control freaks, and I can't say all of us, but when I say we, we know who we're talking about. And we're not only control freaks and greedy, but we want to monopolize everything while we use eugenics, because for some reason this we that I speak of thinks that they are superior to the rest of the world, and I say we because, when I speak, and for the last, at least the last 10 years, I've been speaking to you about the web of life. How one life form is connected to the next life form, which is connected to the next life form, which is independent on, interdependent upon one another, like they taught you in elementary school biology, web of life science. And that's not really what this video is about, but you can Google that. Google River Mary and the Web of Life, and you'll get that video. What this video about is about repeal and why you need to repeal prohibition. And I've already told you, legalize means that you're going to mandate and validate their authority to prohibit this plant, and you're going to secure that there's a black market forever. And then we can all just profit and clean up while they pick and choose who lives and dies. Or you can repeal prohibition of marijuana and prohibition of cannabis completely, and you can demand that you take your rights back, your constitutional, sovereign, God-given, rights to authority and control over this plant and over your own lives, and put it back into your garden, like tomatoes and squash, because you are an endocannabinoid-based system, and your mother fed you endocannabinoids in her breast milk as you nursed and sucked on her breast. And I've said this for many years before the science came even through on it, but I knew it, and those cannabinoids are very important to your health and your metabolism and how you metabolize sugars and starches and how your nervous system runs and, your coordination, so many things, your pain system, how your body deals with pain. There's so many reasons. It alkalines your body. There's so many reasons. In alkalization, if you're a cancer patient, your body needs to be alkaline, and that's why cannabis is good medicine for you. Just one reason. That and all the alpha and omega vitamins in it, and the protein. So, but I fully believe that repeal prohibition is so important, because if you do not repeal prohibition and you hand the corporations and the governments the right to genetically modify this plant, understand that the only thing that makes hemp marijuana is the fact that the closer you plant it to the equator, the more sunlight it gets, the more heat it gets, the more THC it gets. Because why? Because THC is the plant's sunscreen, and that turns it into marijuana, because they want to legally define hemp as having less than 0.0 something, like 0.4 THC, 0.5 THC. The fact of the matter is they have to genetically modify industrial hemp, and if you're passing industrial hemp laws, then you're going to have GMO hemp planted in the fields, and that's all it can be, because they have to make sure that THC don't go above that level. That means they're going to genetically modify your cannabis with a THC stopper gene that will blow on the wind like corn, like genetic modified corn blew on the wind and wiped out all those farmers' crops. Remember all the farmers that were sued by Monsanto because the corn that they had planted in their field as heritage corn had been infected by Monsanto's GMO corn, and then Monsanto said, but wait, you're growing our corn in your field. And the farmers were like, well, how did that happen? Well, how did that happen? It was pollinated on the wind. It blew. That's how crops grow is by being pollinated. That's why we got bees dying everywhere, is because it's bees that pollinate our crops, and they're pollinating our crops with genetic modified corn. And why did they genetically modify corn to begin with? Well, they had to put insecticide inside of it to keep the insects off. What? But it's the insects that pollinates it, or is, well, and the wind. And so we can rely on insects or we can rely on the wind, but there's some crops that just don't, not, the wind doesn't blow all our crops. We need our bees. And so, but, that genetically modified crops, that's another subject you probably need to Google. The fact of the matter is to repeal prohibition is to take your rights back and to say, no, you don't have authority.